morning and welcome to our Events and WorkSafe Tasmania session. Before we start, just as a matter of etiquette, I'm just wondering if all participants could check that you've got your microphone muted if you're not speaking, because that will help us with background noise and feedback. So I hope you've all been keeping safe and well. And I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional and original owners of the land, to pay respect to those that have passed before us, and to acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community, who are the custodians of this land. So we're currently living through a unique time in our history with far-reaching impacts and impacts we are yet to fully understand. We recognise that impact and the important part that our cultural and creative sector plays in lives. And these sessions are designed to help you create your COVID-safe workplace plans and answer any questions you have that are specific to the sector. So if we can just talk to how the session will work. The session is being broadcast live, so please forgive us with any slight delays that we might have with the tech. This is something that we're all learning how to use for the first time, and we're learning lessons every time we do it. We're recording the session and it will be made available on our website later this week, and we'll send out an email to everyone who's registered to let you know when that's online. We're going to start with a presentation from Brad Parker at WorkSafe Tasmania about how to complete your COVID-19 safe workplace plans and any tips that he might have. We're then going to run through a question and answer session. We've got a number of questions submitted before the session that we'll run through, but we also invite people to ask any additional questions that you might have and to use the chat function for that. If we can't answer your question now, or we don't get to all the questions, we'll publish a frequently asked questions document on our website and send that around. Before I hand over to Brad, it is important to acknowledge that each business, venue, organisation or event is unique, and you should develop a tailored plan based on the relevant information for you. The information that we're providing today is a guide and will hopefully assist you in doing that job of developing your own individual plan. So let's get on with it. And I'd like to hand over now to Brad Parker, who's Director of Industry Safety with WorkSafe Tasmania. Thank you, Brad.
Unmute. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me this morning. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is the way the COVID requirements actually apply within Tasmania, and then we'll work through talking about developing your COVID plan and also the guidance material that's available to assist you in that process. Now, I'm conscious that I need to keep track of time, and I will make sure that I leave some time at the end for people to ask questions and have a little bit of a chat around some of the challenges that are quite, specific to your workplace moving forward. So, the first thing I'll do is test the technology and see if I can share my screen. I'm hoping that's happening now. The only problem is I can't see it. Bear with me. Yeah. Okay, so I'm hoping that what you're seeing is an extract from the coronavirus website, .tas.gov.au. This is a particularly useful site when it comes to keeping up to date with information, and provides you with a whole lot of information in regards to the things that you need to know or any questions that you might have. I'm going to zip down here into the resources area, and the reason why I want to do that is that it talks about a range of specific information around fact sheets for various areas, some posters which you can put up in your workplace to assist people in understanding what the requirements are within your workplace, but also down into the current directions and notices. And this is the mandatory requirements that I think it's important that people have an understanding of where to go to find this information, because as things change, and whilst we're travelling pretty well, it doesn't take much for us to find ourselves in a similar situation to what Victoria is, and this is where this area or these directions change on a regular basis. The two areas that I wish to talk about today are the workplace COVID plan, number one. So if we just click onto that, and you'll see this is the specific document. Bear with me for a moment. I'll try to load it up too much. Frozen. Oh, here we go. So this is a public health order. So it's been issued by the Director of Health, and what it specifically does is go through and talks about what things apply in a workplace that we need to be managed whilst we're under a public health order. And the first one of those is talking about making sure that we've got social distancing in place. So where practical, 1.5 metres between the persons in the workplace. And it also goes on to say that we've also got to maintain, in this particular area, this one hasn't been updated because the next one will be updated. It's actually to one person per every 2 square metres of density. And the reason why this still reads at 4 is because the notice that was issued after this one actually makes this one supersedes this requirement in regards to the 4 square metres. It goes on to say that as a business owner or a PCBU, you need to go actually get information and keep abreast of information from a reputable source, hence the reason why I'm pointing you towards the coronavirus website, because that is a reputable source, and there's an obligation there for you to make sure that you're on track and understand what things are changing that may impact on your workplace. Sorry about that. In regards to cleaning, it's appropriate, or cleaning is required in workplaces, and the cleaning is based around reducing the risk of the spread of the disease. So that talks about the frequency at which you have to undertake cleaning and making sure that the cleaning is done appropriately. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation today. Persons entering the workplace, it's important that they must maintain basic hygiene, and that's requiring people to make sure that they are going through and washing their hands frequently. You've got sanitizer in place, and that you're able to make sure that there are adequate facilities in that area to keep people from spreading the disease as they move foot around in your workplace. Obviously, there's a requirement there to provide supplies and equipment to make sure that cleaning is able to be undertaken on a regular basis, and the appropriate materials are used in that cleaning process. There's also a requirement to make sure that as the person in control of the business undertaking, that you're providing instruction, training and supervision to your staff to make sure that people understand what's required, so that you've gone through, you've done the analysis, you've worked out what controls you want to put in place, and everybody that's assisting in running your event or running your or within your workplace understand what's expected of them. That also then moves into providing adequate supervision. So it's fine to put the requirements in, but you've also got to make sure that people do the things they need to do. So there's a requirement there for you to make sure that people are doing and implementing the controls that you've identified as part of the process. There's also a requirement there that says that if people are not who may not be workers, they're not to enter the workplace if they're actually showing signs of the disease, or have been directed to quarantine. So what we're seeing in a lot of workplaces is that you've got to declare whether or not you've been sick or you're showing symptoms, and there needs to be information put out to encourage people who are coming into your workplace or to your event that they actually, if they're unwell or they're not or they think they might be showing symptoms, to not enter the workplace. That's a particularly difficult one because people have different symptoms and it's a little bit hard to identify. But it also places the obligation on the individuals to make sure that if they've been put into quarantine or whatever, that they are actually in breach of the order if they go into a workplace when they knowingly understand that they may be spreading the disease. The final one is. Or the next one I should say, it talks about where you get people to sign into your workplace by entry or you keep a record of them coming in, including video or surveillance camera. There's a requirement there to keep that information for at least 21 days. The reason for that is so that helps with contact tracing should there be an outbreak. But it doesn't require you to actually go through the process of building a system to record the people coming into your organisation. It just goes to making sure that if you do have that information, that you've got the ability to keep track of it. Then we move into where you go through and implement any processes or changes in regards to minimising the risk of the disease, that you need to be making sure that you keep a documented record of that, so that there is clearly understood what controls you have in place, and that typically is via your COVID-safe plan, which is a segue into the next step of the presentation. So just going back in regards to the notice itself, it's it's useful to understand the specific rules in regards to what applies to the workplace. And I mentioned before about the COVID plan, which we just went through, and the management of the premises one goes specifically to making sure that the density of people in your workplace is able to be maintained. This one is specifically important in regards to, it talks about the 1.5 metres away separation distance and social distancing, but it also goes to setting the number of people permissible within divided and undivided areas within the workplace. And you'll see here that it specifically talks about one person per 2 square metres of floor area, and if in an undivided space in an outdoor area, 500 persons maximum, and if an undivided space in an indoor area, 250 people. So this is where you go to find the specific ruling and get an understanding around what it is that you need to do. So enough about that. What we'll seek to do now is to start to zip across into the WorkSafe Tasmania website. So if we go WorkSafe Tasmania. Now WorkSafe Tasmania has provided some guidance material in respect of COVID, and you'll see where it talks about the COVID safe framework, and within the framework it talks about developing a COVID safe plan. Now, COVID safe plans, we have 2 types of plans. We have a plan for small business and we have a plan for medium business, and some indicative size around the number of people that they apply. I think the key thing from my perspective is that the main difference between the 2 documents is that the medium business provides a risk assessment type approach. So it specifically gives you some actions in regards to the way you need to, or what actions you need to do in order to implement the plan moving forward. So what it does is it actually takes you all would do risk assessments as part of managing work health and safety generally, and what this seeks to do is to recognise that COVID is another risk in the workplace, and it needs to work through and identify what are the sources from which the hazard enters into the workplace, and what are the controls that you need to put in place in order to minimise those hazards. So it's very similar to any other sort of hazard that you're involved in, or any other event that you might be running, where you you go through and you do your risk assessment, you talk about security, you talk about seating arrangements and all those sorts of things. Well, this is exactly the same process that can apply in regards to developing your risk, or managing your COVID-based risk. So the first one we go to is just broadly picking up on your risk management system. And I think it's also important to recognise that if you already have a safety management system within your business, and you do have a complex process for managing the risks associated with an event, that you should try and keep it consistent and even use the same tools. You know, these are provided as an example, or as a tool to help you develop your plan, but it's certainly not mandatory. And if you've got a way to deal with that in your workplace, and that's something that and it works for you, then no one's suggesting that you shouldn't use that. The first issue that we need to work through is, or the plan talks about, is your cleaning and hygiene. So as we touched on before through the public health order, what this does is seek to provide some information around the frequency at which you need to go and clean those surfaces, or clean surfaces within the workspace, and the so with cleaning, there's the type of material that or type of substances and chemicals you're using to clean, the frequency at which you're cleaning them, and managing the risks associated with those substances with your staff, and working through those. So it's a matter of recognising that if you're introducing a new chemical into the workplace, or a new disinfectant, you need to get the material safety data sheets and be aware around the safe storage and handling of that equipment, or that product, as you develop your plan. Obviously, when you start considering the risk of COVID, it's about the body fluids and the droplets coming from being transferred from person to person. The reason why we're talking about cleaning is about where those droplets go onto a surface, and then people have the potential to pick those coming in contact with the liquids, and then passing them on across other people. So the cleaning is about looking at where those potential areas of contact are, and making sure that they're cleaned on a regular basis. So what the cleaning is about is identifying those surfaces which are high risk areas, handrails, lift buttons, FPOS machines, all those types of things. And again, very specific to your workplace, but you need to identify where people will be touching those areas, and then working through a cleaning regime that will allow you to be able to make sure that the risk of contact is minimised. And obviously through the use of hand sanitizer and those sort of things when people enter the workplace, by getting people to sanitise as they come in. Again, that's looking at reducing the risk further, because they're not bringing it in as part of their hands and then touching handrails or buttons for lifts or FPOS machines, or whatever the case may be. Obviously, hygiene and just washing the hands with soap and water is quite important, particularly with regards to your staff, and encouraging them to do that on a regular basis, but also getting some information around how to do it properly. There is a number of different resources around that you can provide training to your staff around the correct way to wash your hands, and putting posters up to remind them about doing that. You'll see in this particular area, what it seeks to do is it allows you to identify what you need to do in your workplace, so you can list down the respective actions that require or you identify that you need to undertake, and how you intend to do it. So it goes to describing those areas. We're going to put some posters up in this case. We're going to identify the FPOS machines and phones and those sort of things. When will it happen? So in this particular case, at least twice a day. Now, obviously, if you've got a large volume of people going into an event, you need to be making sure that you've got lots of touch points by lots of people, that you've got a pretty stringent cleaning regime, and having people working the way around doing that over the course of the event, and making sure that in that peak times when people are moving around, that it is that those touch points and the risk is minimised by appropriate cleaning, and then obviously what supplies we're doing, so disinfectants and soaps and those types of things. So again, it's just giving you a tool to allow you to map your way through to identify what it is you need to do, and the way you can develop an action plan in regards to those things, but also gives you a means to record and document what you're doing in that space. We talk about restriction on entry to the workplace, so making sure that people are restricted to entry if they're unwell. We've got to put some signs up. We're going to have security. We've obviously got to keep records of where people are at. So these are, again, a list of where we're going to put signs, where we're going to put people, in order to make sure that people are complying, and just controlling the way people move around the venue is all critical, particularly when you're rolling out events and high volumes of people. Obviously, the challenge is the critical component here is to minimise your density, and working out whilst the maximum number of people within a venue is 250, you've also got to work out is how many you're actually allowed to have if your venue isn't big enough to allow that. So that goes to measuring the size of the rooms, and then dividing by 2 in order to determine how many people you're allowed in the room. Signs should be displayed, and you need to monitor it. You need to count how many people come into these venues in order to make sure that you're not exceeding the capacity of the room or the total numbers in the gathering. As well as that, you also need to be encouraging people to maintain the 1.5 metres social distancing requirement as part of that process. So there's a couple of things in there that really needs to be managed right appropriately, and the key thing is to monitoring it and making sure that you actually do have a clear understanding of where your people are moving into around the venue, and making sure that you're not exceeding the capacity of those areas. Whilst you may have a larger venue which breaks off into other areas, you don't want everyone in the one space at one point in time, because density is a major problem when it comes to spreading of the disease. We need people to be spread out, and we need that social distancing to be applying. And as the event manager or the PCBU controlling that workplace, you need to be making sure that that's being controlled as best you can. Now, there are times when you're relying on the behaviour of the patrons in order to comply with the rules, but as a PCBU, you've got to demonstrate that you've clearly identified what those rules are and encouraging people to comply with them as part of your role as event manager or the PCBU. Moving on to providing instruction, training and supervision in respect to COVID. Again, working out who's responsible for what area, what are their primary tasks, what are the controls that you've implemented that you need to make sure that are being applied across the various areas, making sure that people understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and also working with them to make sure that those sorts of controls and the standard of cleaning and the standard of oversight and the monitoring of those workplaces are all critical activities that need to be managed. It can't just be left to put the rules in place but not actually apply them. So this is about working out what you need to do in order to make that happen, how you'll go about it. So you list down the managers and supervisors' roles, when it will be happening, so where they need to be at specific times, and other issues that may be relevant to them performing their roles. counters or clickers to manage to make sure that people are actively monitoring who's going into the workplace or moving around the work area is really quite important. This particular model also talks about having a response plan in regards to should there be a COVID outbreak. The primary focus here is about being able to notify public health. Events are typically short-lived activities rather than ongoing type activities within a broader workplace environment. But again, it depends specifically on your situation and what you believe you need to have in place in order to manage the risks in that particular area. But recognising that public health are the managers in this space, having the phone number documented and being able to seek advice if you potentially have a problem. The key thing in this one is, obviously you get a large volume of people going to an event, and if you are tracking who is coming in and out of your event or into your workplace, making sure that those records are kept and you've got a ability to assist in that contact tracing as part of the process of managing your risk and helping to keep this disease under control should the worst case scenario happens and you get an outbreak or you've got someone that's come into your workplace that potentially was a carrier. The final component in the safety plan talks about review. One of the things that we're pretty aware of is the COVID space moves very regularly and very quickly. And thankfully, at this particular point in time, we're relatively stable here in Tasmania. As we open the borders, I suspect our risk might increase a little bit. We may have outbreaks. It's important that you've, as you see opportunities to improve your plan and make changes, and encouraging you to document them and outline what they look like. There's very much an issue where the controls that we put in place now will stand us in really good stead as potentially the risk increases as borders open and we get more and more people moving around the state and attending events and activities and those types of things. So really important that you work through that review process. So that's the medium safety plan. Encourage you to have a look at that as part of working out how you're going to manage your safety risks within your workplace or managing your event. The other thing to be aware of is that on the WorkSafe guide on the website is that we've developed a series of guidance material that applies so for a whole range of different industry sectors that allow you to go through and we'll just pick one. And what we've tried to do is provide a level of structure around working through how you manage your activities. So it talks about when you start to look at working through what do I need to do in managing, or what are my risks and what are my controls that I need to put in place. These guidance material, once my computer loads up, provides an opportunity for you to walk through and prompts you in certain areas in regards to how to what controls you need to consider. So one of the challenges is that it's really difficult to identify every control for every workplace, because every workplace is different depending on what they're actually doing. But what this seeks to do is provide some, you'll see here, actions to control the risks associated with the particular event or the activity. And what I would encourage you to do is, if I could get this thing to move, it'll show you a list of the things that you need to consider as part of the process. I seem to have some technical issues with moving around the document, so you'll have to trust me on that, that when you have a look at these guides, there are specific prompts that help you to guide your thinking around where is it that we believe people are going to be at risk, and what are the things that we need to put in place in order to assist us in moving through that process and managing the risk. So just to touch on, bear with me for a moment. I think there's a couple of things to be aware of too, that whilst we're seeing more and more examples of bad behaviour in the media, with 1.5 metres being social distancing not being maintained, and examples of where some of the controls are not being applied as people would typically expect them to be. I think it's important to recognise that as a PCB, particularly when managing large volumes of people, you need to work out and have done all the preparation work to have those controls in place. But at the end of the day, you've got you need to be able to try and do the best to keep people to comply, but you're still dealing with individuals who may not necessarily follow all the rules as you would have liked. And as long as you're able to clearly identify that you had steps in place in order to encourage and assist people to work through those and do the right thing, then I think that's about the best you can really hope for, because certainly there are examples where people do choose to blatantly disregard the requirements, even at whilst the PCBU is trying to do the best they can in a very difficult situation. So I think it's a recognition that you're not necessarily going to get everyone complying 100% of the time. What you do need to do is have a COVID-safe plan that is really quite clear in regards to the way you've identified those hazards, you're managing those risks, and you're working through that process in order to try and minimise the risks the best that you can. And there will be examples where you may find yourself that you've got to put on additional resources in order to make sure that you're actually able to do the additional cleaning that may be required, or the additional staff to supervise and monitor where people are moving within your events and the way they're behaving, and even down to people undertaking activities that they may not be allowed or permitted to do within the venues or workplaces. Now, there are some specific rules in regards to serving of food, that people need to be seated. There are issues around things that are prohibited, like playing pool and those sorts of areas in some hospitality type venues. But again, it's a recognition that you need to be clear as to what you want the patrons to do, the way you want them to do it. If you've got some simple and easy ways in order to help people to comply, then they're the sorts of issues that you need to be identifying within your COVID-safe plan and making sure that they're being applied. As I mentioned,
Brad, I was just going to say, we've got the questions coming in thick and fast.
Okay.
Do you mind if we flipped over to a couple of those?
Happy to do that.
So one of our questions, so we've got a number of people on this session who are from volunteer run or not-for-profit events. And we've had a question, do those organisations also need to complete a COVID-safe work plan?
The line between being a volunteer and the public health order is a little bit unclear, because it relies back on the requirements around the Work Health and Safety Act. And as soon as you have people that are working for an organisation as a volunteer, then there are work health and safety obligations that apply to volunteers as they do to workers. The short answer is yes, it's better to have a plan than not. It's better to recognise that if you are managing an event and you've got people coming in and there's an expectation that they're going to follow the the public health orders, then you need to have a plan in place to help them do that and be working through that as part of your overall management of that event. So that would be my advice, is better to have a plan and not to have a plan. Whether you specifically need it legally will depend on the specific circumstances of the event.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. We've also had a question regarding when an organisation or an event is engaging a security subcontractor to do things like crowd control at their event. Who is responsible for the WorkSafe plan? Does the contractor come in under the organisation's plan?
Most definitely, yes. No.
Okay.
So the person who's running the event or the activity has ultimate responsibility, and they should be working with that contractor in order to make sure that the controls have been identified and that they're being applied. Where you've got a situation where you may have two businesses working side by side, then there's an obligation in order to consult and communicate and cooperate in regards to managing the event, which means that you may have two WorkSafe plans for a single activity, and the two parties need to work through to make sure that both are being applied appropriately and the controls are being applied to manage the risk. Ideally, when you're talking about a situation where you're engaging a security firm to assist in that process, you have an obligation to make sure they are aware of what your expectations are in that space.
Sure. We've got another question asking how people can encourage safe behaviour by patrons, so people arriving at your event.
Yeah, bit of a challenge, that one, because people don't always do what you want them to do. Yeah, putting signs up. A lot of organisations are having recordings over the top of the background, so reminding people that what the obligations are, encouraging them to do that. Yeah, putting dots on the floor are all things to encourage people to do the right thing. And all you can do is try and manage that the best you can, given the nature of the individuals. And yeah, it's a particularly difficult one because not everyone will do everything that you want them to do. Then all you've got to do is be able to demonstrate that you've tried as much as you can in order to manage those risks and control them.
Sure. So if someone isn't complying with the rules that an event organiser has put in place, what can that person do?
Okay, so if they've clearly identified at the beginning of the event or access to the premises that if people aren't going to comply, then there is an opportunity to have them removed, or they're at the end of the day, the PCBU needs to maintain the safety of everyone at the venue, and if you've got people who are not complying with your rules, then you have an obligation to initially pull them aside and have a word to them, or alternatively get them removed from the workplace, because it is the behaviour of one potentially may be putting at risk the risk to the broader people or other persons at the event. And it's no different to, I suppose, where you've got someone who arrives into a venue who's intoxicated, you call the police to have them removed. You can quite easily do the same in regards to your venue. But certainly there's a level of escalation that needs to apply there. Don't just jump to the sledgehammer as the initial response. Try and talk to the person, get security to have a word to them, try and implement some other controls. But if people blatantly just refuse to assist, then you're within your right to say you're out of here. You're placing my people or placing this venue, this activity at risk.
We've had some questions about temperature checks when people are entering venues. Is that something that WorkSafe recommends?
No. Temperature checks have a place, but the challenge is that it's not a absolute assessment. and you've got to have people there to be able to interpret the information. You've got to have a clear process around calibrating the gear, the equipment, and making sure that it's used appropriately. It's an additional tool that can assist in the overall management or reduction of risk, but it's not something that we'd certainly be saying that this is something that all workplaces should have. Public health would be the best place to go if you wanted to go down that path and want more information. They would be able to provide you a much more better understanding in regards to the way you would need to put controls around what that means if someone's got a slightly elevated temperature. Is it just what rules do you put in place in order to deal with it? So it's not a simple control, and I just suggested that there's a level of caution required in that space.
Sure. We've had some questions around distancing for performers. So a question, what's the safe distance between a stage or a performer and an audience member?
So the minimum's got to be 1.5 metres. So that's your social distancing requirement. If you can make it more than that, that's got to be better. The more distance you put in, the better it is. But that being said, as long as you maintain the minimum distance, that's the key thing. And it depends on the venues and those sorts of areas. And the same with performers. Performers should ideally be 1.5 metres apart, but there are times as part of a performance where that distance will encroach, be less, and there are issues, and then you start to say, well, how long can we minimise the time that 1.5 is not being satisfied as part of the process. It's important to recognise that the Department of Health talk about close contact, and close contact is 15 minutes in close contact. So the shorter time you can spend in close contact, the better, or it reduces the risk as an additional control.
Sure. What about queues for people to enter an event or a venue? What are the obligations for organisers to manage those queues and distancing associated with that?
Okay, so queues are a high risk area. When you've done your risk assessment in planning your event, then obviously you're dealing with large volumes of people, and congregating in a very tight area is problematic. So what you need to do is try to avoid that. So if you can get people spread out or not queuing as much, then you need to look at whether there are other options in that space. Where you do have queues, you need to encourage people to maintain the 1.5 metre separation distance. You need to have barriers in place to make sure that people are controlled, or I don't like to use the word herded, but able to manage the way they progress towards the entrance points and the exit points. If you can separate exit points from entrance points, that's also another way of trying to reduce the density of people in a particular area. And if you're outside, you obviously need to make sure you've got enough space for people to queue up at 1.5 metre distance and not be placed at risk more broadly, because obviously our line of lots of people with 1.5 metres between them takes up a bit of space, and 1.5 metres is not just the person in front of you, but it's also the person next to you. So having zigzag lines that run up next to each other need to be managed and thought through as part of that process.
Sure. Probably time for one final question. So people have asked, with the limits on the size of gatherings, does that include, are security staff and ushers and event staff and performers included in that total count, or is that audience only?
That's audience only. So you need to be able to maintain your management of that group as part of the process. So audience only.
Okay, thanks, Brad. We've come to the end of the time that we've had allocated for this session. We've had heaps more questions than we've been able to address today. So the steps from here will be, we are collating, I guess, an advice document that deals with a number of specific issues related to events and other activities. We'll also incorporate the questions that we've received today on this session. We're hoping to have that information available on our website in the next 24 hours. And if you're looking for that, you can find it on the Department of State Growth website. And if you look for the button that links you to the Cultural and Tourism Development Division, there'll be a way to navigate through to all the COVID resources there. But we'll also email those details to all the people who've registered for this session. And obviously this session will be available for people to have a look at and access via our website. So in closing, can I thank Brad Parker from WorkSafe for his time, and for everyone who's logged on today, and particularly for the people who have sent through all the questions. It's been much appreciated. One of the things I did neglect to do at the beginning of the session was introduce myself. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Jackie Allen, and my role at State Growth is as Deputy Secretary for Cultural and Tourism Development, which means I look after organisations like Events Tasmania, Arts Tasmania, Screen Tasmania, and some tourism and hospitality activities. So that is why we are coordinating all of these resources for industry bodies. As I said, we'll send you contacts of our website. Please have a look there. There will be more and more information available over the coming days. But if in all that information you can't find the answer to the question you're looking for, there is also the opportunity to contact the Business Tasmania hotline, and we can research that specific question for you. So thanks again in closing, and we hope that this information is useful for you, and we look forward to being in a position where we can have our events up and running again. Thanks a lot.